The colony ship Ardent Hope was dying. It drifted through the cold black of deep space, somewhere between the Kepler relay station and the outer edge of the Dros Nebula, a region so far from the central trade lanes that most star maps didn't even bother naming its stars. The ship had taken a wrong burn 3 days ago, a miscalculation in the navigation core, a tiny decimal error that had pushed them 11 million kilometers off course. 11 million kilometers didn't sound like much when you were talking about space. But in deep space, 11 million kilometers was the difference between being found and disappearing forever. Captain Elena Marsh stood at the center of the command deck, her hands gripping the edge of the holographic display table. The blue light from the table washed over her face, making the dark circles under her eyes look even deeper than they were. She hadn't slept in 41 hours. She wasn't planning on sleeping anytime soon. "Run it again," she said quietly. Lieutenant Priya Nair, the ship's communications officer, didn't argue. She had run it 6 times already. She ran it a 7th. Her fingers moved across the console with the kind of steady professionalism that came from years of training, the kind that didn't let you fall apart even when every number on every screen was telling you that falling apart was the reasonable response. The results came back the same. "Power reserves at 12%, Priya said. Her voice was calm. Almost too calm. "Life support holding, but only because we shut down sections D through G. Main engines are offline. Backup thruster array, 2 of the 4 are dead. We have maneuvering capability but no real propulsion. At current drift, we'll be past any viable recovery zone in approximately 61 hours. "And the signal?" Elena asked. "Still transmitting. Distress beacon on all standard frequencies. We've been broadcasting for 72 hours. Priya paused. Then very quietly she added, "No response." The command deck went still. Not the dramatic still of a movie, just the quiet, heavy, suffocating still of people who had run out of words. There were 7 crew members on the deck. Behind them, in the passenger sections of the Ardent Hope, there were 412 civilian colonists. Families, children, old people. A full medical team heading to set up a hospital on the new colony world of Sarah Prime. Teachers, engineers, farmers, a group of musicians who had pooled their savings for a fresh start on the frontier. 412 people who had trusted the Ardent Hope to carry them safely to a new life. Elena looked at the star map. She looked at the distance between their current position and the nearest inhabited system. She did the math in her head the way she always did, not because the computer wasn't faster but because she needed to feel the numbers herself. Needed to make them real. The nearest inhabited system was the Varo Junction, a mid-sized trading hub run by the Keth Collective, a coalition of 3 non-human species that had been the dominant force in this region of space for the last 200 years. The Keth were not enemies of humanity, but they were not friends either. They were careful, calculating, and deeply transactional. They helped when helping served their interests. Elena had met Keth traders before. She knew the way they looked at humans, the way you looked at something interesting but ultimately unimportant. "What about the Keth relay at Sector 9? She asked. Priya shook her head slowly. "I've been trying to ping it for the last 6 hours. Either it's not receiving our signal because of the nebula interference or," she stopped. "Or they're receiving it and choosing not to respond," said Chief Engineer Marcus Webb from across the room. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with grease-stained hands and the kind of blunt honesty that came from spending 20 years fixing things that other people broke. He didn't believe in softening bad news. Let's say it out loud. They might be hearing us just fine. They might just not care. Nobody argued with him. Elena straightened up. She rolled her shoulders back. She looked at her crew, these 7 people who had given her their trust and their loyalty and their professional best, and she made herself breathe slowly and steadily. "Okay," she said. "Here's what we're going to do. We conserve every drop of power we have. We reduce life support to the minimum viable threshold for all occupied sections. We rotate the crew into 6-hour sleep shifts starting now. We keep the distress beacon running on a loop. And we keep trying every single frequency we know." She looked at Priya. "Every single one. Military bands, civilian bands, Keth frequencies, even the old pre-war emergency codes that nobody's used in 40 years. We try all of them." "Yes, Captain," Priya said. "And nobody tells the passengers how bad it is. Not yet. We tell them we're working on a solution. Because we are." Elena's jaw tightened. "We are working on a solution." She turned and walked to the viewport at the front of the command deck. Through the thick reinforced glass, the Dros Nebula spread out in front of her, vast and beautiful and completely indifferent. Clouds of gas in deep violet and burnt amber, threaded with slow rivers of silver starlight. Under any other circumstances, it would have been breathtaking. Right now it just looked like a place where things went to disappear. Behind her, the crew moved back to their stations. Keyboards clicked. Screens scrolled. The soft, steady pulse of the distress beacon filled the background of everything. A sound Elena had stopped noticing 2 days ago but which she knew would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life, assuming she lived long enough to have dreams. 61 hours. That was what they had. Down in passenger section B, a 12-year-old boy named Owen Garrett was sitting on the floor of the corridor outside cabin row 7, his back against the wall, his knees pulled up to his chest. He had a small handheld game device in his lap, but he wasn't playing it. He was listening. Owen was the kind of kid who noticed things. His mother always said it, sometimes with pride and sometimes with exhaustion. You notice too much, Owen. Your brain doesn't know how to turn off. He had been listening to the sounds of the ship for 3 days now, and the sounds had been changing. The deep, steady rumble of the main engines that he had fallen asleep to every night for the last 3 weeks of their journey, that rumble was gone. In its place was a quieter, thinner sound, like the ship was breathing carefully, trying not to use too much air. The lights in the corridor had been dimmed to 60% 2 days ago. The crew said it was routine conservation. Owen had looked up distress beacon frequencies on the ship's public information terminal that morning and found that the ship's communication array was broadcasting on 17 different channels simultaneously. He was 12, not stupid. He looked down at his game device. On the screen, a small pixelated spaceship was frozen mid-flight, waiting for him to tell it where to go. He turned the device off and put it in his jacket pocket. His mother was asleep in their cabin. She had been exhausted lately, not just from the journey but from everything before it, the years of saving money and filing paperwork and hoping and waiting for the chance to start over on Sarah Prime. His little sister Maya was asleep next to her, curled up tight the way she always slept, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Owen got up from the floor and walked to the small porthole at the end of the corridor. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass and looked out at the stars. They were very still. Stars weren't supposed to be still like that, not when the ship was moving. When the ship was moving properly, stars had a slight drift to them, a slow crawl across the glass that told you the universe was passing by. These stars weren't moving at all. Come on, Owen whispered to no one. Someone has to be out there. Someone has to hear it. The stars didn't answer. But Owen kept looking. Vero Junction was one of the busiest waypoints in this region of the galaxy. A sprawling, rotating habitat built into the shell of a dead asteroid, home to roughly 40,000 permanent residents and another 20,000 transient traders, travelers, and diplomats at any given time. It smelled of machine oil and alien spice and something that humans with sensitive noses described as burnt copper, which was apparently a side effect of the atmospheric processing the Keth preferred. Counselor Shinvier stood at the long observation window of the Junction's communication center, looking out at the docking bays below. 3 Keth freighters were loading cargo. A Morith diplomatic shuttle was powering up. A human transport, one of the small, beat-up independent traders that moved through Vero Junction regularly, was waiting for a departure clearance that had been mysteriously delayed for the last 6 hours. Behind Shinvier, a junior communications officer named Tef was standing very still, waiting to be told what to do. He had been standing very still for 10 minutes. He was young, barely 2 cycles out of his training rotation, and he had not yet learned the Keth way of patience. His discomfort was visible. "Counselor," Tef said carefully, "the signal is still transmitting. The human vessel, the Ardent Hope, has now been broadcasting on 17 frequencies for 74 hours. They are clearly in significant distress." Shinvier did not turn from the window. "I am aware. The signal is well within our response range. We could dispatch a rescue tender within 4 hours. It would reach them before their power reserves are critically compromised. I am also aware of that." Tef waited. When Shinvier didn't continue, he took a careful breath. Then, "Are we sending the tender?" Shinvier turned from the window. The Keth were tall, nearly 2 meters, with elongated heads and large, dark, multifaceted eyes that gave them a full 270-degree field of vision. Their faces were not expressive in the way human faces were, but a Keth who knew what to look for could read the subtle shifts in color along their neck ridges. Shinvier's neck ridges were a steady, controlled gray, the color of careful deliberation. "Tell me about the Ardent Hope," Shinvier said. "What is its cargo?" Tef checked his screen. "Civilian colonists. 412 passengers bound for Sarah Prime. No significant commercial cargo registered. Some personal effects, medical equipment for the new colony's hospital." "No commercial cargo," Shinvier repeated. "And the rescue operation would cost us?" "Fuel expenditure for the tender, plus crew time, plus the standard filing costs with the Junction Authority." Tef did the math quickly. Roughly 8,000 credits, all costs included. We would be entitled to a salvage claim of. The humans would dispute a salvage claim on a passenger vessel, Chenvier said. They always do. And the legal process would take longer than the value is worth. The counselor walked slowly across the communications room, hands folded behind their back. There is no commercial benefit to responding. The passengers have no cargo worth recovering. The vessel itself is old, not worth the cost of towing. And the political cost of not responding. Chenvier paused. Negligible. Humanity's central government is 3 relay jumps away. By the time any complaint reaches anyone with authority to act on it, the situation will be long resolved one way or another. Tef was quiet for a moment. Then he said very carefully, because he was young and still had the habit of saying things he probably shouldn't, "They have children on board." Chenvier looked at him. The neck ridges shifted slightly, a color that Tef couldn't quite read, something between gray and a dark, complicated blue. "Log the signal as received," Chenvier said. "Mark it as under evaluation. And keep the human independent trader in dock. I don't want them leaving and spreading word of this until the matter is settled." "Yes, counselor," Tef said. His voice was perfectly professional. His hands at his sides had curled very slightly into fists. Chenvier walked out of the communications room. Tef stood alone for a long moment. He looked at the screen, at the soft, steady pulse of the Ardent Hope's distress beacon. He looked at the coordinates. He looked at the 61-hour countdown. He looked at the entry for the human independent trader currently stuck in dock. A small cargo hauler called the Margot, operated by a human named David Rourke, who apparently transported specialty goods between the frontier colonies and had been waiting for his departure clearance since yesterday morning. Tef thought about what he was going to do for about 30 seconds. Then he did it. He pulled up the long-range communication array, opened a tight beam channel on a low-priority civilian frequency, the kind that didn't show up on the counselor's monitoring feed unless someone was specifically looking for it, and transmitted the Ardent Hope's last known coordinates, their power status, their passenger count, and their 61-hour window directly to the communication system of the Margot. He closed the channel. He straightened up. He put his hands flat on the console and breathed. He had probably just ended his career. He was surprisingly okay with that. In Dock Bay 14 of Vero Junction, David Rourke was eating a sandwich when his communication console chimed with an incoming message on his civilian channel. He was a lean, weathered man in his mid-40s with gray at his temples and the permanent squint of someone who had spent too many years looking at bright screens in dark cockpits. He had been a merchant sailor back on Earth before the colony programs opened up the stars. And he had the comfortable ease of a man who had spent his whole life in places that were trying to kill him and had simply decided that wasn't going to be his problem today. He read the message. He put down his sandwich. He read the message again. 412 people, he said to himself. He looked at his navigation charts. He looked at the coordinates. He ran the numbers, not on the computer, in his head, the way Elena Marsh was running numbers 11 million kilometers away, because some things you needed to feel yourself. His ship, the Margot, was a cargo hauler. It had life support for a crew of 3, not 400 passengers. It couldn't tow the Ardent Hope. It didn't have the power coupling for that. It was, by any objective measure, completely inadequate for a rescue operation of this scale. It could, however, reach the Ardent Hope in approximately 5 hours. And it had a long-range communication relay that could punch a signal further than anything on the Ardent Hope could manage. David Rourke finished his sandwich. He stood up, walked to his cockpit, filed a flight departure request with the Junction Authority, not through the normal channels which were being blocked by someone, but through the Emergency Override Protocol, which technically required a declared emergency, and declared one. His departure clearance came through 14 minutes later. By that time his engines were already warm. He flew the Margot out of Dock Bay 14 and pointed her nose toward the Dross Nebula, and he pushed his old cargo hauler as hard as she would go. The Ardent Hope had a common area on Deck 3 called the Gathering Room. It had been designed by someone who understood that people on long space voyages needed a place that didn't feel like a ship. A place with warm lighting and comfortable furniture and a viewport big enough to remind you that the universe was beautiful even when it was also terrifying. There were plants in the gathering room, real ones, growing in sealed hydroponic trays bolted to the walls. A small library terminal. A coffee dispenser that, mercifully, was still functional because Elena had specifically told Marcus to keep it online even when they were shedding every other non-essential power drain. Elena sat alone in the gathering room at 0300 ship time, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago because she kept forgetting to drink it. The rest of the ship was as quiet as a space vessel ever got. Even the distress beacon had been routed to a background frequency so it didn't pulse through the speakers anymore, Though she still heard it, a ghost sound living permanently in the back of her head now. She was looking at the viewport. She was thinking about her father. Her father had been a maritime captain back on Earth, a North Atlantic cargo run, same route for 30 years, the kind of man who knew every mood of that ocean the way other men knew their own names. He had told her once, when she was 17 and had just announced she was going to apply for the Space Maritime Academy, that the hardest part of command wasn't the decisions. The decisions were actually the easy part, he said, because when a decision had to be made, you were busy making it and there was no room in your head for anything else. The hardest part, he said, was the waiting. The hours when you had done everything you could do and the only thing left was to wait and see if it was enough. You'll know that feeling someday, he had said. And when you do, remember that the waiting feels like nothing is happening. But things are always happening. The universe is always moving. You just can't always see it from where you're sitting. Elena wrapped her cold coffee cup in both hands and stared out at the violet and amber clouds of the Dross Nebula and tried very hard to believe that. She had almost succeeded when the door to the gathering room opened and Owen Garrett walked in. He was still in the clothes he'd had on earlier, hadn't slept, clearly, and he had the particular look of a kid who had decided to stop pretending. He saw her, stopped, and for a moment looked like he might turn around and leave. "It's okay," Elena said. "I'm not sleeping either. You want some coffee?" "I'm 12, Owen said. "Right. Water?" "Sure." He came in and sat down across from her while she got up and filled a cup from the dispenser. She handed it to him and sat back down. They looked at each other for a moment with the mutual recognition of two people who both knew what was going on and were both tired of pretending otherwise. "How bad is it?" Owen asked. Elena considered lying. She had been lying, or at least soft-truing, to 400 passengers for 3 days. But there was something in this kid's face, in the steady, direct way he asked the question, that made the lie feel impossible. "It's not good," she said. "We're trying everything. But nobody's responded to the beacon." "Not yet." Owen nodded slowly. He turned his water cup in his hands. "My mom doesn't know. She thinks it's a routine delay. That's what we told everyone." "She's been through a lot," Owen said. It came out very simply, not as an explanation or an excuse, just as a fact he was reporting. "My dad died 2 years ago. She saved for 3 years to get us on this ship. She sold everything. She told Maya and me that Sarah Prime was going to be our new beginning." He looked at the viewport. "She really needs it to be." Elena felt the weight of that settle on her. 412 versions of that same weight, 412 people who had sold everything and hoped for everything and trusted the ardent hope to carry them to it. "I know," she said quietly. "So what can I do?" Owen asked. She looked at him. "What?" "To help. What can I do? I'm not going to just sit in the corridor and wait. I looked up the ship's systems on the public terminal. I know about computers. My dad was an engineer, he taught me coding when I was 8. I can help with something." He met her eyes directly. "Tell me what I can do." Elena Marsh looked at this 12-year-old boy who had decided that being scared was less useful than being helpful, and she felt something in her chest that was very close to the specific kind of love you felt for people who chose courage when they had every reason not to. "Can you run a frequency scan algorithm?" she asked. "If you show me the interface once," Owen said. She stood up. "Come on then." By 0500 ship time, Owen Garrett was sitting at a secondary communications terminal on the command deck, running a modified frequency scan that Elena and Priya had set up for him. A broader sweep than their standard equipment could do automatically, looking for any kind of signal echo that might indicate a vessel or relay station in range. Most of what it found was background nebula radiation and the electromagnetic noise of distant stars. But the act of searching felt better than the act of waiting, and Elena had learned long ago that keeping people busy was how you kept them from losing their grip. Priya had gone to sleep for her 6-hour rotation, leaving Lieutenant James Cho on communications. He was a quiet young man from Chicago, serious and careful, who had initially looked uncertain about a 12-year-old on the command deck until Owen had correctly identified and flagged a Keth background frequency that James had been about to ignore. After that, James treated him like a colleague. At 0612, Owen sat up straight. "There's something," he said. James crossed the deck in 4 steps. He leaned over Owen's shoulder and looked at the screen. There was a signal, faint, heavily degraded by the nebula interference, but there. Not a beacon. Not a standard hail. Something that looked like a civilian transponder moving toward them. "That's a ship," James said. "Yeah," Owen said. "A small one. A cargo hauler, maybe?" "How far out?" Owen checked the readout. "About 3 hours? At their current speed." James stared at the screen. He pulled up the signal profile and ran it through the ship's identification database. A result came back. Independent Cargo Vessel Margot. Registry, Earth Colonial Authority. Operator, David Rourke. James looked at this for a moment. Then he opened the intercom to the captain's quarters and said, "Captain Marsh, you need to see this." Elena was on the command deck in 4 minutes, still pulling her jacket on, her hair undone, looking like someone who had genuinely been asleep for 40 minutes and would have very much preferred to continue. She looked at the screen. She looked at the signal. She looked at James. "How certain are you?" 94% confidence on the transponder ID, James said. "It's the Margot. She's moving fast for a cargo hauler. Looks like he's running her at about 110% of rated engine capacity." "He's burning his engines out," Elena said. "Yes, ma'am." She turned to the communication console. "Open a channel. It's going to be rough through the nebula interference." "Open it anyway." The channel opened with a wash of static that sounded like waves on gravel. Through the noise, a voice came through, unhurried, a little raspy, with the flat vowels of someone who had grown up somewhere in the American Midwest. "This the Ardent Hope? You folks still with me?" Elena grabbed the transmitter. "This is Captain Elena Marsh of the Ardent Hope." "Who is this?" "David Rourke, independent hauler out of Vero Junction. I got your coordinates from a friend. I'll be with you in about 2.5 hours. Mr. Rourke, I need to be honest with you. My ship has 412 passengers. I don't know what your vessel capacity is, but can't carry your passengers, Captain. That's not why I'm coming." Elena hesitated. "Then why are you coming?" There was a brief pause. When Rourke's voice came back, it had the careful tone of someone choosing their words precisely. "I've got a long-range communication relay on the Margot. Military grade. I paid a lot of money for it at a time in my life when I needed to be reachable anywhere in a hurry. It can punch a signal 12 relay jumps in any direction. Clean, no interference degradation." Elena felt something shift in the room. She heard James Cho take a sharp breath beside her. Across the deck, Marcus Webb, who had come up from the engine room 15 minutes ago and was pretending to work on a power coupling report, had gone completely still. "I can't rescue you, Captain Marsh," Rourke said. "But I can make sure the right people know exactly where you are." "Who are the right people?" Elena asked. The static hissed and popped. Through it, David Rourke's voice came back steady and even. "The ones who answer." 2.5 hours felt like 2.5 years. Elena spent them doing the things a captain did, checking on the crew, walking through the passenger sections with the practiced calm of someone who was not walking through a potentially dying ship, stopping to talk to families, bouncing a toddler on her knee for 10 minutes while her exhausted mother sat with her eyes closed and just breathed. She found Owen's mother, a warm, tired woman named Sarah Garrett who had the same direct eyes as her son, and told her that Owen was helping out on the command deck because he was clever and they could use clever. Sarah Garrett had looked at her with the complex expression of a mother who was both proud and worried, and Elena had told her, as honestly as she could, that Owen was doing well. She went back to the command deck 40 minutes before the Margot was due to arrive and found Owen exactly where she'd left him, still running the frequency scanner, still working, and currently eating a protein bar that James Cho had apparently produced from somewhere. "Still clear," Owen reported, not looking up from his screen. "No new signals except the Margot." "Good work," Elena said. She sat down in her command chair and looked at the distance counter. 41 minutes. 40. 39. Marcus came up from engineering. Priya came back from her sleep rotation. The command deck filled up with people who had found reasons to be there, even the ones whose shifts hadn't started yet, because everyone knew something was happening and no one wanted to be somewhere else when it did. At 32 minutes out, Owen said, "I can see her on visual." Elena looked at the secondary viewport screen. The Margot was a small shape against the nebula, moving hard and fast, her running lights amber in the violet clouds. She was a battered, ugly ship, the kind that worked for a living, all function and no form, with the scars of 100 hard dockings along her hull. She was the most beautiful thing Elena had ever seen. The Margot pulled to within 2 kilometers and matched their drift. A channel opened automatically. "Captain Marsh," Rourke said. "I'm going to start transmitting. I want you on the channel so you can hear exactly who I'm reaching and what I'm saying." "I'm here," Elena said. "Go ahead." What happened next, Elena would describe later, many times in many different places, as the strangest 12 minutes of her life. Not because of what David Rourke said. What he said was actually quite simple. He opened the military-grade relay on the Margot, aimed it at every human-accessible frequency in a 12-jump radius, and transmitted a clear, precise distress call. The Ardent Hope's coordinates, their power status, their passenger count, their 53-hour window, and the Keth Junction's deliberate non-response. That last part. That was the part that mattered. Because Rourke didn't just call for a rescue. He called for a witness. He named Vero Junction. He named the Keth Collective. He stated, plainly and on every frequency that anyone within 12 relay jumps could hear, that a colony vessel with 412 passengers including children had been broadcasting a distress beacon for 78 hours and that the nearest station with full rescue capability had received the signal and deliberately chosen not to respond. He said it once. The 12 minutes that followed were the time it took for the signal to travel. And then the responses began to come in. The first response came from a civilian relay station at Kepler, 14 minutes after Rourke's broadcast. It was a standard acknowledgement, signal received, forwarding to regional authority, the kind of automated response that meant real humans would look at it in a few hours. Useful but not immediate. The second response came from a Morath diplomatic vessel that happened to be in transit near the Dross Nebula's outer edge. The Morath were a species that Elena knew mainly as skilled diplomats and trade negotiators, elegant, formal, and deeply concerned with the appearance of propriety. Their response was polite and promised to register concerns with the appropriate interstellar oversight bodies, which was Morath 4, we will write a very stern letter. The third response came from the Theron Merchant Consortium, which had a commercial resupply depot approximately 18 hours from the Ardent Hope's position. They offered to dispatch a supply pod with additional power cells and life support materials. Not a rescue but a lifeline that could extend their window significantly. That's good, Marcus said, leaning over Priya's shoulder to look at the incoming message. Power cells alone could buy us another 40 hours. With their supplies and our conservation measures. We could hold for over 90 hours total, Priya said. Which gives a rescue vessel time to reach us, Elena said. If a rescue vessel is coming, Marcus replied. The command deck went quiet. Keep monitoring, Elena said. The fourth response came 6 minutes later. It was different from the others. It didn't come from a civilian station. It didn't come from a diplomatic vessel or a merchant consortium. It came from a frequency that Priya initially didn't recognize, a tight, encrypted band that cut through the nebula interference with startling clarity, as if the nebula itself had decided to get out of the way. The encryption resolved after 3 seconds into clear text, and the identifier at the top of the message made Marcus Webb actually step back from the console. Us Relentless, United Humanity Ship, Classification, Frontier Defense Vessel, Admiral-class Warship. Transmission to, Ardent Hope, Civilian Colony Vessel. Transmission from, Captain Sarah Okonkwo, Us Relentless. Current position, classified. To your coordinates, calculating. Captain Marsh. We have your signal. We are coming. Hold on. The command deck was completely silent for 3 full seconds. Then Owen Garrett, sitting at his secondary communications terminal, said in a very small voice, "Oh." And then, because he was 12 and had been awake for 22 hours and had been holding himself together with pure will for most of them, he put his face in his hands and cried. Not loudly. Very quietly. Just a kid who had been trying very hard not to be scared and had just been told, in 8 words, that it was okay to stop. Elena Marsh stood at the front of the command deck with her hand pressed flat against her mouth and her eyes very bright, and she did not cry because she was the captain and she needed to receive the next message. But it was close. Get me a channel to Captain Okonkwo, she said. Her voice was perfectly steady. The channel took 4 minutes to establish. The encryption protocols on a military vessel were not quick. But when it opened, the voice on the other end was exactly what Elena had needed to hear for 3 days. It was calm. It was certain. It was the voice of someone who had been to hard places before and had always come back from them. Captain Marsh. I'm Sarah Okonkwo. My ship is the Relentless. We're coming. Captain Okonkwo. Elena had to stop. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for 1 second, allowed herself that 1 second, and then continued. We have 53 hours on our window, potentially extending to 90 with a Theron supply pod in transit. What is your ETA? There was a brief pause. Not hesitation, calculation. Elena could hear the hum of a warship's navigation systems in the background, the kind of deep, powerful hum that civilian ships never had, the sound of something built to cross vast distances at speed. 31 hours, Okonkwo said. Maybe 28 if we push. You're pushing, Elena said. Not a question. We're already pushing, Okonkwo confirmed. Captain, I need you to conserve everything you have. Keep your people calm and keep your systems running and let us come to you. Understood. Elena paused. Captain Okonkwo, how did you get our signal? We're deep in the Dross Nebula. Your ship should be. We have very good ears, Captain Marsh, Okonkwo said, and there was a very slight warmth in her professional voice. the warmth of someone who had made a hard choice and was glad of it. When a ship with 400 children on board is screaming into the dark, we try to make sure we can hear it. Elena closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me in 31 hours. Okonkwo's voice was steady and warm. "Keep your people safe. We'll see you soon." The United Humanity ship Relentless was not, by the technical classification standards of the United Humanity Navy, the largest warship ever built. There were bigger vessels, the Titan-class dreadnoughts, the orbital fortress platforms, the carrier groups that patrolled the core systems. But among the Admiral-class frontier defense vessels, the Relentless was acknowledged by everyone who served on her, encountered her, or was unlucky enough to be on the receiving end of her attention, as something exceptional. She was 740 meters long, nearly 3/4 of a kilometer of hull armor and weapons systems and engine cores that could push her to velocities that made other ships in her class look like they were standing still. She had been built 22 years ago at the Meridian shipyards and had spent those 22 years doing what Admiral-class ships were built to do: patrolling the frontier edges of human space, showing up in hard places, and making it clear to anyone who might be considering doing something unkind to human ships or human people that the consequences of that decision would be severe and immediate. Her crew numbered 812. Her captain, Sarah Okonkwo, had commanded her for the last 6 years, and in those 6 years, the Relentless had responded to 47 distress calls, conducted 19 search and rescue operations, and participated in 3 significant armed engagements along the frontier. She had never lost a rescue operation. Sarah Okonkwo had made a personal policy of that, a promise to herself that she renewed every time they got a distress signal, every time she sent her crew into the void to bring someone home. She was not going to start losing today. Captain Okonkwo was on her bridge when the Ardent Hope signal came in, or more precisely when David Rourke's relay transmission punched through the Relentless long-range receivers like a fist through paper. She had been reviewing supply reports, the kind of routine work that didn't stop even in the middle of operations, and the signal had arrived with the kind of clarity that made her communications officer, Lieutenant Commander Felix Adeyemi, sit up very straight and say, "Captain, you need to hear this." She heard it. She listened to Rourke's voice, steady and deliberate, laying out the Ardent Hope situation in precise, unsparing detail. She heard the passenger count. She heard the children. She heard the part about Vero Junction. She put down her supply report. "Navigation," she said. "What's our current position relative to Dross Nebula grid reference?" She rattled off the coordinates Rourke had transmitted. Navigator Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka had it calculated before Okonkwo finished the sentence. 29 light hours, Captain. At current speed, 37 hours. At maximum push, 28. Maximum push, Okonkwo said. She turned to her helmsman. "Ensign Park, I want everything she has. Every engine core, every ion thruster, every milligram of fuel we can put into forward momentum. We are going to that ship." "Yes, Captain." She turned to Adeyemi. "Open a channel to the Ardent Hope. Get me there, Captain. It'll take a few minutes to cut through the nebula interference. Then start cutting." She walked to the front of the bridge and stood at the main viewport, a sweeping curved window that looked out at the deep black between stars, the endless vast nothing of interstellar space. Somewhere out there, in the violet clouds of the Dross Nebula, 412 people were waiting and hoping and trying very hard not to stop believing. Sarah Okonkwo had grown up in Lagos, the daughter of a harbor pilot who guided ships through the dangerous channels of a busy port. She had grown up understanding that some people's entire job was simply to show up, to be there, to know the channels well enough that the ships in their care didn't run aground. Her father had done it for 30 years without anyone making a film about it or writing songs about it, because it was just the work. You learned the channels. You guided the ships. You brought them home. She was going to bring this one home. "Full power to engines," she said. "Let's go." The Relentless surged forward, and the stars outside the viewport shifted. A subtle change in the drift of distant light that meant speed, real speed, the kind that made the hull sing with vibration. 800 meters of warship, engines burning at maximum output, crossing the void. Back on the Ardent Hope, the message from the Relentless had done something remarkable to the ship's atmosphere. Elena hadn't intended to tell the passengers. She had planned to wait until they had more concrete information, until the rescue was close enough to be certain. But word traveled fast on a ship, and Owen Garrett, who had no experience with careful information management, had gone straight back to the passenger section and told his mother. Sarah Garrett had told the people in the cabins near hers. Those people had told everyone else. By 1400 ship time, the gathering room was full, more people than it was designed to hold, standing in the corridors outside, sitting on every available surface, all of them passing around the news like water after a long thirst. A human warship. Coming for them. 28 hours. Elena stood at the front of the room and confirmed it. She answered every question as honestly as she could. She told them about the power situation, about the Theron supply pod coming, about the extended window. She told them it was still going to be hard and that they needed to keep conserving power and keep calm and keep trusting each other. And then a woman near the back, a schoolteacher named Grace who was going to Sarah Prime to open the colony's first school, said, "Who is the captain of the warship?" "Captain Sarah Okonkwo," Elena said. "Can we send her a message?" Elena thought about it. "I'll ask her communications officer if the channel is available." "I want to say thank you," Grace said. "I want her to know, I want all of them on that ship to know, that we know they're coming and we're grateful." She looked around the room. "Don't we all want that?" The gathering room in response was not silent. It was the opposite of silent. The message arrived on the Relentless 3 hours later, not from Captain Marsh, but from 412 people, recorded in segments by Priya Nair and stitched together into a single transmission. Crew members on the Relentless who heard it said later that it was unlike any message they had received before. Not because of what was said, most of it was simple, honest, straightforward. "Thank you. We know you're coming. We're holding on." But the volume of voices, one after another, child voices and adult voices and elderly voices and one very earnest 12-year-old who had clearly been awake for too long and said into the recorder, "I looked for you on the frequency scanner. I found the Margot first but then you were there and I just, thank you, that's all, just thank you." Captain Okonkwo listened to all of it, alone in her ready room with her door closed. When she came back out to the bridge, her navigator noted that her jaw was set very firmly and her eyes were very bright. "Everything all right, Captain?" Felix asked. "Everything is fine," Okonkwo said. "How long?" 24 hours, 40 minutes, Captain." "Good." She sat in her command chair. "Keep pushing. 24 hours is a long time to wait for your life to be saved." Elena Marsh understood this in a new way during those hours, not just intellectually, the way she had always understood that waiting was hard, but in her body, in the particular exhaustion of sustained tension, the way her shoulders refused to unknot and the way food tasted like paper and the way time seemed to have developed a strange elasticity, stretching in the quiet moments and snapping forward in the busy ones. She managed the ship. She kept the crew rotating through proper rest intervals. She managed the power conservation with Marcus, squeezing every additional hour they could out of the reserves. She walked the passenger sections twice a day, talking, listening, reassuring. She played 3 hands of cards with a group of elderly colonists who had set up a regular game in the gathering room because, as their self-appointed leader, a retired architect named Bernard said cheerfully, "I refuse to spend what might be my last hours doing anything dignified." The Theron supply pod arrived at hour 18, precisely as promised. It was an automated delivery vehicle. No crew, just cargo, loaded with high-density power cells and additional life support materials. Marcus and his engineering team worked for 4 straight hours integrating the power cells into the Ardent Hope systems, and when they were done, the power reserves had jumped from 8% to 31% and the life support had been extended to full capacity for all sections. The lights came back on in sections D through G. It was, Elena would remember, one of the best moments of the entire ordeal. Not the arrival of the Relentless, that was the best moment, but this, the lights coming back on in the dark parts of the ship, the sound of passengers cheering in the corridors, the way a simple thing like full lighting could make a ship feel like a ship again instead of a coffin. David Rourke had docked the Margot alongside the Ardent Hope, a technical feat that his old cargo hauler was not really designed for, involving a creative use of his maneuvering thrusters and a docking collar that was slightly the wrong size for the Ardent Hope's airlock and required Marcus Webb to spend 90 minutes engineering a solution with parts that were not designed to work together. But it worked. And when the airlock opened and David Rourke stepped through onto the Ardent Hope, he was immediately and somewhat overwhelmingly greeted by a crowd of passengers who had apparently decided as a collective that he deserved a hero's welcome. He was a man who was visibly uncomfortable with hero's welcomes. He stood in the corridor with his hands in his jacket pockets and a slightly pained look on his face while people hugged him and shook his hand, and a small girl of about 4, Owen's sister Maya, it turned out, presented him with a drawing she had made on a piece of paper, which appeared to depict a ship flying toward the sun and was labeled, in careful child's handwriting, "The Nice Man." "I didn't actually rescue you," he said to no one in particular, surrounded by people who were not interested in that distinction. Owen found him eventually once the crowd had thinned slightly. He stood in front of Rourke with his hands in his pockets, mirroring the man's posture without realizing it. "You burned your engines," Owen said. "They'll be fine," Rourke said. "You had your departure clearance blocked." You filed an emergency override. Rules have exceptions. Why did you come? Owen asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. You couldn't rescue us. You said so. You just came to relay the signal. You burned your engines and risked your cargo and left a station where you were already held up just to relay a signal. Rourke was quiet for a moment. He looked at this kid, this serious, careful kid with the dark circles under his eyes and the straight-backed way he held himself, and he said very simply, because I could. Owen thought about that. That's it. That's everything, Rourke said. Elena had one more private conversation during the long wait, and it was not one she had planned. She was in the engineering bay at hour 20, going over power management with Marcus, when her personal communicator chimed with an incoming message tagged from Vero Junction. From Counselor Chinvier. She almost didn't open it. She stood looking at the tag for a long moment with Marcus watching her from across the bay, his arms crossed, his face doing the thing it did when he was being quiet on purpose. She opened it. The message was short. Formal in the Keth style, which meant it had the elaborate structural grammar of official Keth correspondence but no warm language at all. Captain Marsh. It has come to my attention that your situation has attracted significant response and that your vessel is expected to receive rescue within the next several hours. I wish to convey that the delay in response from Vero Junction was the result of standard resource allocation protocols and was not intended as a reflection of any judgment regarding the value of your passengers or their welfare. Elena read it twice. What is it? Marcus asked. An apology, she said. The Keth version of an apology. She looked at it for another moment. Then she forwarded it without comment to David Rourke, because he had named Vero Junction in his transmission and she thought he should know. She didn't respond to it. Some things didn't deserve a response. At hour 22, Owen fell asleep at his communications terminal. He had been awake for over 30 hours, running scans that were no longer really necessary but that he had continued because stopping felt like giving up, and he had simply run out of the resources to keep his eyes open. He slumped sideways in the chair, his head tilting, and was asleep within about 45 seconds. Priya Nair, who had been watching him with the quiet fondness of someone who recognized stubbornness as a virtue, stood up and got a blanket from the emergency supply locker and draped it over him. She turned his screen brightness down. She told James Cho to keep his station quiet. James looked at the sleeping kid and then at his own screen, where the relentless transponder signal was moving steadily, unmistakably closer. 2 more hours, James said softly. 2 more hours, Priya agreed. The Ardent Hope sensors picked up the Relentless at a range of approximately 800,000 kilometers, a distance at which the warship was still too far for visual detection, but close enough that her drive signature burned through the nebula interference like a lighthouse through fog. It was nothing like a civilian drive signature. Civilian ships had engines that were efficient, quiet, designed for economy and endurance. The Relentless engines were designed for power, not efficiency, not economy, but raw, thunderous, overwhelming power. Her drive signature was 6 times stronger than the most powerful civilian engine Elena had ever encountered. On the Ardent Hope sensors, the approaching warship looked less like a ship arriving and more like a star being born at close range. Marcus Webb, looking at the sensor readout, said, "Oh, that's a warship." He said it the way you might comment on the weather, not surprised, just stating an obvious fact with appropriate gravity. 800,000 kilometers, Priya confirmed. Speed is... She stopped. She looked at the number. She rechecked it. She's moving at 92% of maximum rated Admiral-class velocity. In the Dross Nebula. Through all this interference and gas density. She's not slowing down at all. She'll decelerate inside 600 kilometers, Elena said. That's a very short deceleration window for a ship that size moving at that speed, Marcus noted. Yes, Elena agreed. It is. They looked at each other. She planned it that way, Marcus said. She's coming in hot on purpose. Elena nodded slowly. She's showing us something. Owen Garrett woke up at 400,000 kilometers. He woke up because the Ardent Hope's passive sensor array, the low-power detection system that ran even on minimum power, had triggered an alert that had nothing to do with any emergency protocol and everything to do with proximity. A 400,000 kilometer proximity alert meant something very large was very close. He sat up in his chair, disoriented for a moment, the blanket falling off his shoulders. He looked at his screen. He saw the sensor readout. He saw the drive signature. He looked at the distance counter. 350,000 kilometers. 300,000. 250. Is that? He started. Yes, said James Cho from 3 stations over, watching the same screen with a very wide smile. Owen stood up from his chair. He crossed the command deck to the main forward viewport. He pressed his hands and his face against the glass the same way he had pressed them against the porthole in the passenger corridor, 3 days ago, looking at still stars and asking someone to please be there. The stars in front of the Ardent Hope were not still. Something was moving through them. Something large. Something that trailed fire. The Relentless came out of the deep clouds of the Dross Nebula at 150,000 kilometers, decelerating hard now, her braking thrusters blazing in the vacuum, trails of blue-white fire streaming behind her as she bled velocity at a rate that made her hull groan audibly through the sensor feeds. She was enormous. Even at this distance she was enormous. Her running lights caught the violet gas clouds of the nebula and scattered them into a halo, so that she seemed to carry her own aurora with her as she came. She came through the void at speed and in silence. Space was silent, that was the thing about it, there was no medium for sound, but on the Ardent Hope, looking at the visual feed and the sensor readouts and the sheer scale of this thing that was crossing the empty dark to reach them, silence felt wrong. It felt wrong in the way that silent lightning felt wrong. Like the sound should be there and its absence was somehow louder than the sound would have been. At 50,000 kilometers, the Relentless was fully visible on the Ardent Hope's optical sensors. 740 meters of warship, her hull dark gray with the long scoring marks of hard use, her weapon systems unmistakably present along her flank, not deployed, not raised, just there in the way that a soldier's size was there, a reminder that she was built for things beyond rescue. But she was here for rescue. She had come across the void for rescue, burning her engines at maximum for 28 hours, and she was slowing down with the careful precision of a very powerful thing, choosing, deliberately, not to harm the small fragile ship it had come to help. At 20,000 kilometers, a channel opened. Ardent Hope, this is UHS Relentless. We have you on visual. You look good to us. How are you holding up? Elena was at the command console. Her voice was entirely steady. We're holding Relentless. We are very glad to see you. Likewise, Captain. We're going to match your drift at 10 kilometers and then bring our rescue teams across. We have medical personnel aboard if you need them, and we can begin transferring your passengers to our shuttle bay immediately. We'll have everyone aboard within 4 hours. Understood. Elena stopped. She put her hand on the console, steadying herself. Captain Okonkwo? Here. 412 people on this ship have been waiting 3 days to say thank you. I'd like to say it first on their behalf. She paused. Thank you. The channel was quiet for a moment. When Okonkwo spoke again, the professional warmth in her voice had a texture to it that Elena would never forget. Not false, not performed, just honest and human and real. You're welcome, Captain Marsh. Every single one of you. The Relentless matched drift at exactly 10 kilometers. A maneuver that required the kind of precision engineering that only came from a crew that had done their jobs 10,000 times together. From the Ardent Hope's viewport, she hung in space like a gray mountain, her engines cooling from their long burn, her shuttle bay doors opening with the methodical certainty of a mechanism that had never once failed to work. The first shuttle crossed the gap in 6 minutes. Owen Garrett watched it come from the viewport. He watched it the way you watched something you had imagined so many times that seeing it in reality felt less like seeing something new and more like recognizing something you already knew. The shuttle was large, blocky, utilitarian, military design, all-purpose and no aesthetics, and it docked with the Ardent Hope's secondary airlock with a solid thunk that echoed through the hull. And then the door opened and the crew of the Relentless came aboard. They were ordinary-looking people. That was what struck Elena first. Not their uniforms or their equipment, though both were impressive, but the way they looked like ordinary people. The rescue team was 12 crew members in dark Navy flight suits, led by a chief petty officer named Torres, a short, efficient woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back tight who shook Elena's hand with a grip that communicated precisely zero drama and then immediately asked for a layout of the ship and account of anyone with medical needs. 3 elderly passengers with cardiac conditions, Elena said. 2 children with respiratory issues. The air quality in Section E was poor before we got the power cells. And my engineer has a cracked rib from a repair accident 2 days ago that he refused to let us treat because we didn't have the resources to spare. I didn't refuse, Marcus said from behind her. I postponed. Where's your engineer? Torres said. Here, Marcus said. Torres looked at him. Get on the shuttle. Medical bay first. I have repairs. Your engineer can manage for 4 hours, Torres said, with the specific tone of someone who had won this exact argument with stubborn engineers before. Get on the shuttle. Marcus got on the shuttle. The passenger evacuation was, in Elena's professional assessment, the most efficiently run large-scale human operation she had ever witnessed. Torres's team had clearly done this before. They moved through the Ardent Hope's corridors with calm competence, organizing passengers into groups, handling the inevitable panic of children and the stubborn reluctance of people who had brought all their worldly possessions and didn't want to leave any of them behind, managing the medical needs of the elderly and vulnerable without any visible stress. It was the kind of work that didn't look heroic on a screen or in a story. It looked like people doing their jobs very well with patience and skill and good humor. A crew member, a young man from the Relentless named Specialist Chin, spent 20 minutes helping an elderly couple named the Hendersons catalog exactly which of their boxes were most important and which could be retrieved later, because Mrs. Henderson had brought 40 years of photograph albums and was not going to Sarah Prime without them, and Chin was not going to let that be the thing that broke her. An ensign named Becky spent the entire duration of the evacuation sitting with Maya Garrett, who had woken up to find strangers in unfamiliar uniforms in the corridor and had decided this was terrifying, and had patiently kept her calm with a combination of a very good puppet show done with the stuffed rabbit and an apparently infinite supply of patience. 4 hours and 12 minutes after the first shuttle docked, every passenger and crew member of the Ardent Hope was aboard the Relentless. Every single one of them. Elena was the last to leave. She walked through the empty Ardent Hope one final time, not because she needed to, but because she needed to. She walked through the dimmed corridors of the passenger section, past the quiet cabins, past the closed doors of the gathering room where the plants were still growing in their hydroponic trays. She walked through engineering, past the patched and jury-rigged systems that Marcus and his team had nursed through 3 impossible days. She walked to the command deck. She stood at the forward viewport for the last time and looked at the Dross Nebula, the violet and amber clouds, the silver threads of starlight, all the same and somehow entirely different from what they had been 3 days ago. The nebula that had looked like a place where things disappeared now looked like the place where a small cargo hauler had burned its engines and a warship had come roaring out of the dark. She turned around. Across the empty command deck at the secondary communications terminal where he had spent 30 hours running frequency scans, Owen Garrett was standing. He had come back. He was standing there with his hands in his pockets, looking at the terminal, at the screen that was still showing the scan results, the record of the search he had run, the moment he had found the Margot, the moment the Relentless transponder had come through. "You were supposed to go with the first group," Elena said. "I know," Owen said. He didn't move. He was looking at the screen. "I just wanted to see it one more time." Elena walked over and stood beside him, looking at the screen too. The scan data was frozen, a snapshot of the moment when the dark had answered back. "You found them, you know," Elena said. "You were running that scan when the Margot's transponder came through. You called it." "James found the Relentless," Owen said. "You called the Margot first." She looked at him. "That matters. It's all a chain. Rourke couldn't have relayed without getting here first. He got here first because you caught his signal and we opened the channel. It's all connected." Owen was quiet for a moment, looking at the frozen scan data. Then he said, "My dad used to say that the most important thing anyone could do was to be the person who looked." He didn't look at her. He meant in life generally. But, he gestured at the screen, "I think about it a lot." Elena put a hand briefly on his shoulder. Then she said, "Come on. Let's go meet the Relentless." The Relentless was a warship and it felt like one. The corridors were wider than the Ardent Hopes and deliberately lit, not the warm, domestic light of a civilian ship, but the functional, unwavering light of a vessel that didn't have time for ambience. The surfaces were gray and the angles were clean and every single thing in every corridor had a purpose, a label, and a specific place it was supposed to be. It was also, in the hours after the evacuation, loud in the way that a ship housing 400 extra people was always going to be loud. Crew members from the Relentless had given up their personal quarters to families with children. The medical bay, which was designed for a crew of 800, not an additional 400, had expanded its operations into 3 adjacent rooms. The mess hall was running on a continuous rotation, feeding passengers who had been eating survival rations for 3 days. Elena was escorted to the bridge by a young ensign who had the particular quality of someone who was very professionally keeping their excitement contained, and she appreciated the effort. The bridge of the Relentless was a cathedral of a room compared to the Ardent Hope's command deck, vaulted ceilings, multiple levels of stations, a main display screen so large you could see it clearly from every position in the room. The crew moved on it with the rehearsed ease of people who had done this together for a long time. Sarah Okonkwo met her at the entrance to the bridge. In person, she was a tall woman in her early 50s, broad-shouldered and spare, with close-cropped gray hair and a face that had the particular quality of someone who had made many hard decisions and lived with all of them. She shook Elena's hand with a firm grip and looked at her with the direct, assessing gaze of a person who made accurate judgments about people quickly and didn't waste time revising them. "Captain Marsh," she said. "Captain Okonkwo." Elena returned the grip, the gaze, the directness. "Your ship is remarkable. She is, Okonkwo agreed without false modesty. I'll give you a proper tour when we're clear of the nebula. Right now I want to debrief on the Ardent Hope's status and make sure your engineering team has everything they need to assess the repair situation. The Ardent Hope isn't, Elena started. No, we won't abandon her, Okonkwo said. That's what you were about to ask. She was already turning back toward the bridge. I've dispatched a skeleton crew to maintain her systems. Once we're through the nebula and in range of a proper salvage contractor, we'll arrange a tow to Kepler 7 for full repairs. Your passengers can continue to Sarah Prime on scheduled transport from there. She glanced back over her shoulder. The Ardent Hope has a good hull. She's worth saving. Elena followed her onto the bridge. Where did you come from? She asked. Your original position. It was classified in your transmission. Okonkwo stopped. She turned. There was something in her face. Not reluctance exactly, but the careful quality of someone choosing how much to say. We were on a patrol route, she said. Classified because of the region, frontier edge, active diplomatic sensitivity. We were not, technically, supposed to be reachable via civilian frequencies. She paused. But Rourke's relay was military grade, and when it transmitted on every available frequency, it included the military bands we use for long-range frontier communication. So you were in range? Elena said. We were in range, Okonkwo confirmed. But Captain Marsh, even if we hadn't been, there were 6 other vessels that received that signal. A naval patrol vessel out of Kepler 7. A civilian rescue organization operating in the Theron sector. A Morith diplomatic ship that has more rescue capability than it typically admits to. We were the fastest. But you were not alone. Elena let that settle. You were not alone. Not a comfort and not a condescension, just a fact. The universe had heard. Multiple voices had answered. David Rourke had made sure of it. The man on the Margot, Okonkwo said. Rourke. I'd like to meet him. I'll introduce you, Elena said. He's going to pretend he doesn't want any recognition. Good, Okonkwo said with the ghost of a smile. I'll pretend I don't notice. The meeting between Sarah Okonkwo and David Rourke happened in the relentless officer mess, over coffee, and was witnessed by approximately nobody because both of them were intensely private people who didn't do things in front of audiences. Elena knew about it secondhand from Rourke, who described it afterward with the economy of someone who doesn't use more words than necessary. She thanked me for the signal relay. I said I didn't do much. She said I did enough. We had coffee. She's good people. From Okonkwo's side, secondhand from Felix Adeyemi, who had somehow ended up delivering a coffee tray and had not been able to avoid overhearing. Okonkwo had told Rourke that what he had done, transmitting on military bands, naming Vero Junction, making the Keth non-response part of the public record, had implications beyond this single incident. That there would be a formal inquiry. That the behavior of Vero Junction would be reviewed at the interstellar oversight level that the Morith had promised to register with, and that with a corroborated record including a military frequency transmission, that review would have teeth. Rourke's response, according to Felix, had been, good. And then they had finished their coffee. 3 days into the journey to Kepler 7, with the Ardent Hope under skeleton crew escort behind them and the Relentless moving at comfortable cruise speed, the ship settled into something that wasn't quite normal but was the closest thing to it that this particular collection of people was going to get for a while. The passengers from the Ardent Hope had begun, gently and carefully, to integrate into the daily life of the warship. The crew of the Relentless had adapted to them with a graciousness that Elena found deeply moving, not because it was easy, but because a warship was not designed to house civilians and everyone on both sides knew it and was making it work anyway. The school children had taken over a cargo bay that Chief Petty Officer Torres had voluntarily converted into a recreation space, with the help of 12 crew members on their off-rotation who had apparently decided this was more interesting than their other options. The medical team from the Ardent Hope, the doctors and nurses heading to set up the colony hospital, had integrated into the Relentless medical bay and were currently, according to the Chief Medical Officer, the most competent supplemental staff I have ever had the pleasure of working beside. Bernard, the retired architect who ran the card game, had started a new game in the officer mess and was reportedly winning consistently against crew members who should have known better. Grace, the schoolteacher, had given 3 informal talks about colonial education theory to an audience that had started as 5 crew members curious about what life on the frontier was like and had grown to 30, because she was a very good speaker and the Relentless had people on it who were intelligent and curious and didn't get enough intellectual variety on long patrols. Life was continuing. It was loud and sometimes difficult and occasionally someone cried in a corridor for no reason except that the accumulated tension of the last week had to go somewhere, but it was continuing, which was the thing that mattered. Elena spent much of those 3 days doing paperwork. The official reports for an incident of this magnitude were extensive and required the kind of careful, precise documentation that was both important and tedious. She wrote the account of the navigation error, the power failure, the distress broadcast, the Keth non-response, Rourke's relay, the Theron supply pod, the relentless arrival. She wrote it as clearly and accurately as she could, because she understood that this account would go into permanent records and would be read by people making decisions about the future, about rescue protocols, about relay infrastructure, about the obligations of stations like Vero Junction to civilian vessels in distress. She also wrote a personal letter to the family of the Ardent Hope's navigation officer, Lieutenant Kezia Park, whose decimal error had started everything. Kezia had not slept properly since the incident. She had been doing her job with meticulous, almost painful care, as if she was trying to retroactively fix something that was already fixed. Elena had talked to her twice and had said what needed to be said, that mistakes happened, that Kezia had done everything right once the mistake was made, that she had contributed to the repair efforts and the rescue, and that the 412 people aboard were alive because of the work of every single crew member including her. But she knew the letter would take longer to heal. She wrote to Kezia's parents because she believed in writing to parents. She told them their daughter was a good officer and a good person and that Elena was proud to serve with her. Then she wrote to David Rourke. This letter was shorter. It said 3 things. Thank you. Your engines will be repaired at Earth Colonial Authority expense as a consequence of emergency services rendered, and she would like if he was willing to maintain contact, because the galaxy needed more people like him and she liked knowing where they were. Rourke's response came back in 11 minutes. Engines would be appreciated. Contact I can do. Good luck on Sarah Prime, Captain Marsh. It's a good world from what I hear. Owen Garrett found Elena on the observation deck on the second night, which was where she had started going when she needed to think without a ship around her needing things. The observation deck on the Relentless was a small, quiet room with a curved viewport that looked directly aft, backward, at where the ship had been rather than where it was going. You could see the Ardent Hope in the distance, her running lights steady, her skeleton crew maintaining her through the dark. Owen sat down beside her without asking, which she found she didn't mind. My mom cried this morning, he said. She said she was fine. She cried for about an hour. That's allowed, Elena said. I know. I'm not worried about her. I think she needed to. He paused. I think she's been not crying for about 3 years. Elena looked at him. What about you? I cried on the command deck, he said matter-of-factly. When the Relentless message came in. You saw me? I did. That was enough for me. He looked out the viewport at the Ardent Hope. Do you think she'll be okay? The ship. Marcus thinks so. He says the hull integrity is solid. The issues were all power and mechanical, nothing structural. She'll need about 6 weeks in a repair yard and she'll be fine. Owen nodded. He was quiet for a while. Then, I think I want to do this. Do what? This. He gestured vaguely at the ship around them, at the viewport, at the stars. Not the nearly dying part, but the being out here part. Figuring out what's going wrong and trying to fix it. Looking for things. He paused. Communicating. Elena looked at him for a long moment. This kid who had noticed the engines were wrong, who had looked up distress beacon frequencies, who had stayed awake for 30 hours running a scan because looking felt better than waiting, who had found the Margot in the noise. You'd be good at it, she said. You think? I think you already are, she said. You've been doing it for a week. Owen thought about that. He seemed to like it, the way you liked something that confirmed something you already suspected about yourself. He turned it over quietly, not making a big thing of it, just letting it settle. My dad would have liked it here, he said after a while. Tell me about him, Elena said. So Owen told her. And the Ardent Hope kept its running lights on behind them in the dark, steady and bright, a ship that was still there when a lot of things had tried to make it not be there, traveling through the void in the company of something that had come roaring out of the nothing to make sure it got home. 6 months later. The colony world of Sarah Prime was everything the brochures had said it was, which was unusual for colony world brochures. It had wide amber plains and violet mountains that looked, at sunrise, like the Dross Nebula reproduced in stone and light, which Elena had found, when she first saw it, unexpectedly moving. The colony was young and busy and loud with the sound of people building things, and the hospital that the medical team had come to establish was already half-constructed and already treating patients, because Frontier Worlds didn't wait for the construction to be finished before needing medical care. The school that Grace had come to open had its first class 3 weeks after the colonists arrived. 22 children in a room that was technically still a prefab construction unit, sitting on crates and folding chairs, in front of a whiteboard that was actually just a large sheet of white composite material. Grace taught them the first lesson of the first day of the first school on Sarah Prime, and she taught it the way she taught everything, with complete attention and absolute conviction that what she was doing mattered. Elena Marsh had stayed. She hadn't planned to. She had planned to oversee the colonists' arrival, ensure the transfer from Relentless to the scheduled transport to Sarah Prime went smoothly, file her final reports, and then report to Earth Colonial Authority for her next assignment. She had a good record and could have her pick of commands: a new deep-range explorer vessel, a luxury liner run, a position as a harbor master at one of the larger relay stations. She had, instead, applied for a position as the colony's first maritime coordinator, the person responsible for managing the ship traffic that would, as the colony grew, become increasingly significant. It was a ground-based position. It paid less than a ship captaincy. It involved a great deal of paperwork and coordination and the kind of slow institutional work that never made for exciting stories. She had applied because of what Owen said about his father. About being the person who looked. About looking for things. She had been approved before she finished her second cup of coffee on her first morning on Sarah Prime. Owen had gone back to school, a proper school for a few years because his mother had insisted and she was right, but he had also, with Elena's help and Priya Nair's enthusiastic support, enrolled in the junior comms program that the Relentless ran for civilians interested in space communication systems. It was a correspondence program, conducted over the relay network, with practical exercises that required access to communication hardware. Elena had arranged for Owen to have access to the colony's communication array 3 evenings a week, which was more than enough. His program supervisor had reported back to Elena 4 months in, one of the best students they had seen at his level in 5 years. She was not surprised. The formal inquiry into Vero Junction's response, or non-response, to the Ardent Hope's distress beacon had been concluded 2 months after the incident. The findings were not comfortable for the Keth Collective. The inquiry, which included both human representatives and the Morith diplomatic observers who had promised to be witnesses, concluded that the standard resource allocation protocols, cited by Councillor Chenvier, did not, under the Interstellar Maritime Distress Convention to which the Keth Collective was a signatory, constitute legal justification for failing to respond to a distress beacon from a vessel carrying civilian passengers. Vero Junction was fined. The fine was significant. More significant was the precedent, the formal, documented, multilateral witness precedent that a station's commercial calculus was not an acceptable reason to let a ship full of children disappear. Tef, the young Keth communications officer who had leaked the Ardent Hope's coordinates to David Rourke, had been disciplined by Councillor Chenvier before the inquiry concluded. His disciplinary record had been reviewed by the inquiry board and, in its findings, specifically cited as an example of the kind of ethical judgment that the convention was designed to protect. The inquiry recommended that Tef's disciplinary record be expunged and that his actions be formally recognized. Chenvier had implemented both recommendations. The neck ridges, when Tef had received the news, were a color that the color readers in the translator algorithm had consistently flagged as unclassified, which in Keth physiological terms generally meant an emotion that didn't have a word yet. David Rourke passed through Sarah Prime 6 months after the incident, on a regular cargo run. He spent 2 days planetside, which was more than he usually spent anywhere. He had coffee with Elena and dinner with the Garrett family and spent an entire afternoon with Owen, going over the practical communication exercises and apparently having a conversation that lasted 4 hours and that Owen described afterward only as really good. Rourke's engines had been fully repaired by Earth Colonial Authority as promised. He had also, Elena noticed, quietly upgraded his long-range relay system. The new one had, according to the specs, a range of 16 relay jumps instead of 12. She didn't ask him why. She knew why. Captain Sarah Okonkwo and the Relentless were back on patrol in the frontier zones, as they had always been. They had received, in the months since the Ardent Hope rescue, a significant amount of public attention, the kind that came from Rourke's broadcast having been heard on 17 frequencies by a lot of people, and the subsequent inquiry and the formal recognition. Okonkwo had handled the attention with the same approach she handled most things, professionally and briefly, and then she had returned to work. The Relentless had responded to 4 more distress calls in the 6 months since. All 4 had been successful. Felix Adeyemi, her communications officer, had started keeping account. Not publicly, just for himself, in a small personal log because he believed that some things deserved to be witnessed and written down even when no one was watching. The count was at 52. On the morning of the 6-month anniversary, not that anyone had formally designated it as an anniversary, it just happened to be the day, Elena was at her desk in the Maritime Coordination Office, which was a prefab building at the edge of the colony's landing field, doing what maritime coordinators did: monitoring traffic, managing schedules, making sure the ships that came and went did so safely. The office smelled of fresh construction material and good coffee and, faintly, of the amber plains outside. A dry, warm, wide-open smell that Elena had come to associate with mornings on Sarah Prime. Her communication console chimed. The signal was from a relay station 12 jumps away, a long way out but not unreachable. The identifier resolved. She sat up slightly when she saw it. As relentless, Captain's, Okonkwo. The message was short. It was the kind of short message that two people who had earned mutual respect could send each other without preamble or explanation. The kind where the meaning was clear in what it didn't need to say. Captain Marsh. We're being reassigned, patrol route change, moving further into the frontier edge. New route will put us within response range of your sector. Thought you should know. Elena read it twice. She sat back in her chair and looked out the window of the Maritime Coordination Office at the landing field, at the amber plains beyond it, at the violet mountains on the horizon that looked like a nebula frozen in stone. Somewhere out beyond those mountains, past the atmosphere and the gravity well and the comfortable familiarity of a planet's surface, the deep dark began. The void that had swallowed the ardent hope and given her back. The immense, indifferent, beautiful black of space that didn't care about anyone but that people crossed anyway because on the other side of it were the things that mattered, the new beginnings, the fresh starts, the hospitals not yet built and schools not yet opened and lives not yet lived. She wrote back. Captain Okonkwo. Good to know where you are. We'll keep the lights on. She sent it. She picked up her coffee. She went back to work. Outside, on the amber plains of Sarah Prime, the first day of the second school term was beginning. 22 children plus 11 new ones were settling into their seats in a building that was no longer a prefab unit but a real, permanent structure with windows and a proper floor and a painted sign above the door that said Sarah Prime School in large, clear letters. Grace stood at the front of the class and looked at her students, 33 children who had come from Earth and from the ardent hope and from the void between, children who had every reason to know that space was hard and who had chosen to be here anyway. She began the lesson. On the relentless 740 meters of Warship moving through the deep dark of the frontier edge, the communications array turned toward the vast expanse of space ahead. All the distances and all the silence and all the darkness were somewhere, right now, someone might be trying to signal that they needed help. The Relentless was listening. She was always listening. That was what she was for. In the log of the UHS Relentless, under the entry for the rescue of the civilian colony vessel Ardent Hope, the final field reads, Outcome, all aboard recovered. 0 casualties. Notes, signal received via independent relay, civilian vessel Margot, operator D. Rourke. Response time from signal receipt to passenger recovery, 31 hours, 14 minutes. Added note, Captain S. Okonkwo, there was a 12-year-old boy running the frequency scanner when the Margot's transponder came through. His name is Owen Garrett. Remember it.